Hey everyone, my name is Greg Master, and today I'm going to be demoing my final project for the Python Methodologies class, summer of 2021. For my final project, I decided to write a program called Fantasy Draft Pro. The idea behind this program is to take data from prior seasons of fantasy football and kind of help users identify which players should be drafted first, second, third, etc. in their future or upcoming fantasy football drafts. Originally, my idea was to collate data from the past 5 seasons, excluding the 2020 to 2021 NFL season due to the multiple COVID opt outs and such. However, when I began coding up this project, I realized that it was becoming a little bit too much to handle. So, my program mainly focuses on the 2019 to 2020 NFL season data. So, with that, let's just jump into the program. So this is the Excel file that I downloaded from Pro Football Reference. It contains data on, I think, over 700 NFL players, all of them which had logged some sort of fantasy football points throughout the 2019-2020 season. And there's a whole bunch of data here, everything from player, team, and position to yards, targets, receptions, how many fumbles, passing touchdowns, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, etc. So the first thing I did when I got this CSV file is I converted it into this text file, and I did that because the text file is a little bit easier to read into the program and begin working with. So as you can see, this is the text file that I submitted to Canvas as where my data came from. With that, let's take a look at the code in the program. So these are my two files that I will upload to Canvas as the submission for my project. To the left, we have the main program, and then to the right, we have the function library. I'll go into a little bit more detail on the relative specifics of each one as we go on. So if I run the main program here, and I apologize, I'm running it on a laptop and a monitor. So upon running the program, you're greeted with this nice little header. Welcome to the Fantasy Draft Pro program. And there's a header there that has some key data, a few key notes, excuse me. The first of which is that the data only includes offensive skill position players, no kickers or defense. Part of the reason for that is that I wasn't really able to find good data for the kickers and for the defense along with all the skill position players. And the data was filtered for players who started at least half of the season, which is 8 games, even though now the season's 17 games. The reason for that was it's just a little bit of a subjective preference for me that, if you're going to draft somebody, you want them to be relatively available. So after that header, the first thing that the user experiences is a user prompt, and that prompt asks them to select which data they would like to view. I have 6 options here for the data of which I'd broken down. The first is the top 30 overall players. The second is the top 30 non-quarterbacks. The reason for this is because the top 30 players are generally quarterbacks due to the fact that they rack up a lot more points and due to yards and passing touchdowns. And then from 3 through 6, we have quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So I guess let's start with number 1, the easiest one to start. So if the user inputs 1, they are asked then how they would like to see the top 30 data. And this is going to be the same for each of the 6 options, but what I did was I gave the user 3 options for how they want to visualize the data. The first of which is printed to shell. So if the user inputs 1, the data table is printed to the shell, and what you see here is it's indexed from 1 to 30, as it's the top 30. And then what I did was I ended up zipping lists together for the data after I had taken it out and filtered it and indexed through it. So you have name, team, and then average fantasy points per game. The name and the team are self-explanatory. For the average fantasy points per game, what I did was I took the, for example, if it's a quarterback, passing yards, passing touchdowns, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and I had pulled all that data, separated it, and then iterated through it based on how those fantasy football points are calculated in the real world, and that's how I came up with these numbers. It does not account for interceptions, fumbles, or lack of points. Uh, I didn't want to over quantify it, so this is just a relative kind of baseline for the average fantasy points a game. It's not that far off from the actual numbers, though. So after viewing this data table, the user's prompted with, would you like to see more top 30 data? So if they hit yes, they're brought back to that same menu, and then let's take a look at the scatter plot. So here is the scatter plot that gets pulled up. As you can see, it has name and it has average fantasy points per game. The scatter plot is a very nice feature because as the user hovers the mouse over each respective point, it breaks down exactly what the number is and who that player is, and I think it's just a very good way to kind of visualize who are the really achievers and who are kind of the sub-achievers, and to let users make their own decisions as to who they want to target in their respective drafts. So if we get rid of that and we bring up this, would you like to see more top 30 data? Yes. And then let's go with the third and final option, which is a text file saved to folder. So if the user is to input option 3, they're prompted with, please check your folder for the top 30 all list text file. So if I go into my folder, which contains this program, and I pull up the top 30 all list text file, here it is. There's a little bit of formatting issues, but I think it's a great way for users to be able to kind of save the data locally on their computers, so that way they won't have to constantly run this program. If they want to see the data, they can run it once, download all the text files for each one, and then kind of make their decisions from that standing. So back to the program. Would you like to see more top 30 data? As we went through all the possible options, if we hit no, then you're prompted to if you would like to exit the program. So not yet. So if we hit no to that, we can jump into, for example, the wide receivers. And again, like I mentioned before, it's the same menu, but if the user wants to see the data printed to the shell, they hit 1, and then if they open up this, as you can see, it's same again. It's indexed from top to bottom. All of the data files are sorted by the average fantasy points per game, which is obviously the most relevant statistic here, and then its name and then relevant team. So after you scroll down all these 73, would you like to see more wide receiver data? Yes. Scatter plot, again, same idea. Unfortunately, because there are 73 names, the scatter plot does look a little bit messy, so I suggest for users to play with the settings here to kind of make the graph fit the screen a little bit better. And I apologize for dragging things back and forth. I'm on a monitor and a laptop, but anyway. So yeah, here you see all 73 names again, and then you see the x-axis with the respective tick marks. And again, just another really great way to visualize the data. There are some points that kind of go across multiple names. For example, you have, I think, Zay Jones, and you have another Jones here, and then another Jones here. The reason for that was that it was a little bit difficult for me to figure out how to get the team names to fit into this y-axis here. But again, if you pull up the data frame and you pull up the scatter plot, it should be a very simple kind of look-see to see which is the top performing wide receiver named Jones and which is the bottom performing wide receiver named Jones. So if we move this out of the way and then go back to the program, would you like to see more wide receiver data? Let's just pull up that text file again, prompted with the please check your folder for the wide receiver list text file. I go back into my folder, boom, there it is, and here, average points and name. So as you can see, it's a relatively, I think, very user-friendly program. I think it really gets the job done for anyone who wants to utilize this for their fantasy football drafts. There's obviously different kinds of data, again, broken up by quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And probably most crucially to people are the top 30 overall and the top 30 non-QBs. So if we take a quick look at that, and then we, again, print it to the shell, here you see that there's all kinds of players ranging from Travis Kelce at number one, who's a tight end, to Christian McCaffrey, number two, who's a running back. All of these things are really important for users to know and understand when making their decisions as to who to draft first, as your first overall pick is really the guy you're going to depend on for the rest of the season. So yeah, and to exit the program, you just simply select no at the would you like to see more menu, and then would you like to exit the program, you hit yes. Do you want to kill it? Not yet. So yeah, here are my two files again. On the left is the main program, on the right is the function library. I hope you enjoyed the demo, and I hope the program kind of fits the needs for the users that it's designed for, and that the code properly represents what the code should look like for a program of this stature. So thank you.